Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Today we're going to have a conversation about AI, digital twins, and the future of pharma operations with Mike Boyson. Mike is a supply chain and pharmaceutical operations leader with over 20 years of experience spanning CMC strategy, external manufacturing, and digital transformation, spending over a decade at Takeda, where he led oncology and biologics supply chain ops, and served as executive director of value chain leadership at Moderna, one of the early adopters of AI and LLMs. And now Mike supports others as Azure Biopharma Consulting. Mike, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Luke.
To start with then, I think it would be good to talk about the general state of pharma and AI as you see it. There's a lot of talk about it, but I think certainly when it comes to manufacturing, there's been quite a lot of hesitation perhaps in how you actually implement it in a GMP environment.
Sure. We can start with the hesitation first. One of the issues that the industry is grappling with is the fact that if we start with even Annex 11 in the EU, it expressly prohibits the use of generative AI or LLMs. And so the industry as a whole has to think a little bit about how it will implement or use those tools to really better our systems processes and organizational design. One of the ways that I've been thinking about that, or I've been trying to understand that better, is through an organization that I'm lucky to be a part of, ISPE, and the GAMP5 and AI Guide, where the practical approach is a risk mitigation approach. It's a risk balanced approach. Trying to find ways to keep a human in the loop or show all of the work that AI is doing, or find ways to make sure that we're preventing security threats. Those are all things that need to be done in order to be able to get the industry more comfortable with the use of AI in this space. I would say the level of comfort of the use of these types of tools in this space is pretty low. And then the last thing I would say is that AI and machine learning has been something this area has been exploring for quite some time, dating back to 2016. But this was before the implementation of neural nets and LLMs and really the rise of AI as we think of it today.
Mike, just so we're clear on your role within all of this, I think you'd admit that you're not necessarily like an IT guy by background, and it's all what you bring, I think, to this. Your lens is on domain experience and how you actually implement these tools within pharma and biotech.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, in a lot of ways, just a user. I'm someone who, has had to build models in Excel for supply chains and things of that nature, all the way through the implementation of SAP and really other tools that allow us to be more successful as an industry. But I am in no way, shape, or form an IT professional or even a computer systems validation or computer systems assurance professional.
Thank you. When people talk about AI in pharma, I think generally people sort of fall back on ChatGPT or Claude or I suppose Gemini now and various other LLMs. Is that where you're seeing the real operational value now, or from something else?
Yeah, so for a while now, I've been using Claude and Claude Code and even implementing Claude Cowork. Claude Code is extremely powerful. And now ChatGPT 5.4 is competing with it. Really they're just moving past each other as they compete to be better and better models. Claude also has a code checking engine now that's being implemented. All of these things are allowing somebody like myself to vibe code. Although I would even say that the word vibe coding is now going away because the way that people in the space talk, this is coding today, that domain users like myself or people who have general coding experience, they're using these tools to create things for themselves. That's also why we've seen the threats in the software as a service space and other areas.
It has been very noticeable, hasn't it, by how some of those SaaS valuations in the last couple of months have just fallen off a cliff.
Absolutely cratery. Yeah, no, it's certainly telling. So Jensen Huang is very much of the feeling that Claude and ChatGPT are not going to replace those pieces of software. I think that's perhaps a little bit too facile an argument. I think that
Mm.
Claude or ChatGPT are going to be selecting the right types of software to use in the space. And also, if it's easier or relatively easy, like imagine there's a low moat software as a service company out there that somebody like myself can just say, well, it'd be easier if I just built my own
Mm.
using Claude. I could. And I would just say that beyond Claude Code and ChatGPT 5.4, I've been using, or I've just started using Perplexity Computer. I know others are using OpenClaw. OpenClaw is for sure something that I think would be very difficult to implement in an enterprise environment, at least today as it is. But Perplexity Computer has some opportunities for it, where it's starting to work as an agentic orchestrator. And so I can have it running multiple agents for me in parallel.
Great. Really interesting to understand some of those use cases a bit more, Mike. Would you mind walking us through some concrete examples from your own work, whatever you want to call it, vibe coding or otherwise? What have you done with it?
Sure. So dating back to the summertime when I was really just using a little bit of GPT and just the beginning of Claude Code, I started putting together some digital twins that could be used to assess the where the industry stands or where certain parts of the industry stand regarding supply chains. So I kept it so that these were not something that would be making GMP decisions or really GXP decisions. They were making chain decisions or offering supply chain modeling for users to be able to push and pull or to pull in data that exists coming out of either API calls or Amazon Redshift or whatever it might be, links to SAP that allow for professionals in their domain to take guesses as to where potential demand might drive them to make certain decisions about do we need to build or buy, do we need
Mhm.
to create space on a particular line, do we need to sell off certain assets or find different uses or
Mm.
repurpose different assets. Those are all things that these digital twins could do. I did one for a relatively large company based, on its flagship product, and we just looked at the global adoption of an auto injector
Mm.
and what that would do in the space. I mean, you can imagine, right? If you're switching from a traditional vial and syringe or a pre-filled syringe even to an auto injector, some markets might pay for it, some markets might not. And that's going to have an impact on your supply chain. What are you going to order for your pen? How much pen assembly is going to be required? Are you using a cartridge or a pre-filled syringe that can be used elsewhere? All of those are questions that could be
Mm.
plugged into this or that were plugged into this digital twin to push and pull. That's one.
That sounds like quite a lot of background research was needed to sort of look at different markets and how they'd respond. You're also mentioning SAP data as well. Could that also be pulled in to inform the supply chain forecasts?
Yeah, I mean, SAP pushes or pulls from SAP can sometimes be tricky, but for the most part, I mean, it's a lot of output today. It can be even just packaged up into an Excel feed if you really wanted to go kind of lower technology. But there's no reason why you can't pull information about where your current inventory projections are going to be for anywhere in your supply chain, whether it be for the ordering of regulatory starting materials or all the way to the mix between multiple suppliers for your drug product.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that information could be pulled in on a daily basis, or depending on how often your refresh is running. I mean, 7 hours or 5 hours, whatever it might be. There's no reason why you can't have a direct
Mm.
connection. Um, Pushing back, though, I think that's where I stopped.
Yep.
These twins are not making decisions in SAP. They're really just pulling information out of SAP.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you.
And the other area was really just a very simple question. The required supply chain mapping for any routing or any market routing. especially in the EU, is something that a lot of companies, I think, grapple with ensuring that they've got their supply chain maps up to date and committed appropriately. One of the things that I did really in an afternoon was create one for a 60 market product that allowed for us to really click in on any individual piece in the supply chain map to understand its routing, its physical routing, its documentation routing, whether it be quality documentation or otherwise, its legal routing. So how is it being financially transacted? And all three of those spaces, they interact in different ways. So I created just in an afternoon, a very easy to understand Python program that allows you to click and see where certain inventories may be at those particular nodes. This information does pull from SAP, and that's one of the other really easy places that I started to work.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier as well, using agents as well. What are the sort of the main case studies or opportunities which you're thinking about at the moment when it comes to using agents?
Yeah, so to be honest, this one's still early for me. I'm really trying to understand the space, but one could very easily deploy a set of agents for, let's take one area that I'm looking at right now is the use of digital tier boards, and trying to understand the use of agents that could sit behind those tier boards to help the organization for every tier meeting to have more fruitful discussions, better escalation pathways, better understanding of where their data is taking them, better scenario offerings for some of the higher tiered meetings if needed. You could imagine that there's an agent that is pulling data from MES or otherwise on the floor and making that available for users. You could have a voice agent that's picking up information from the frontline operators and what's happening out on the floor on a particular day. Even if it's down to just, how are you feeling about today's manufacturing? Is it good, bad, or indifferent? All of those little pieces of data allow for the organization to collect real-time information and then pass it on. So you could have another agent that's running on a schedule that would pick up that information, ensure that it's updating your tier one tier board, and then offering up ideas for escalation to tier two. And that's just from frontline to tier two. There are plenty of other ways. I know organizations use Excel. There are some tier board solution providers out there right now who are working in this space, digital tier board solutions. But I know other users are using SharePoint to pass the information along, right? So these are all little areas, I think, where you could deploy probably people today who are collecting the information. Okay, we need so-and-so to give a PowerPoint demonstration on this particular issue that's happening, or we need to understand, what today's information is on a particular investigation that's coming through. All of those things could be collected by agents, I think. But again, it's early for me, so I don't really know for sure exactly where we're going to get to.
Yeah, I've heard of one company setting up a deviation agent, a contract agent who would sort of review the contract terms and everything like that as well. Such an interesting area, isn't it? What would you say that people would need to get started with something like this? Let's say if we just pick a platform, let's say Claude, for example. Say you wanted to start to build out some agents in this space. You mentioned Python. Is that necessary? Claude Code, there's skills.
Yeah.
Just to try to piece together how you actually make this stuff happen. Because I think everyone's very familiar with being a human operator, punching into your browser what it is that you want to do, getting it to do a task. But if you want to move into this more programmed way of working with agents, how do you go about doing that?
Where I started with this, I don't know Python really at all. I almost know nothing about it. And in fact, it started all before Claude Code. I would have ChatGPT write Python for me and then tell me what I needed to do inside the terminal on my laptop. And so I was cutting and pasting from ChatGPT into my laptop terminal.
To what end, Mike? What does Python do which you can't achieve elsewhere?
Well, Python is just a language. So it's really just another software programming language, just like Java
Mhm.
or really any other computer software language. It's just for me, it seemed that ChatGPT was more comfortable with it, and it was something that it was easier for me to do the cutting and pasting.
Mhm.
So that's where I started. It seemed natural for me to use that. I'm sure that anyone could select the best language that they choose, that works for them.
Yeah.
There are languages out there like R, which are great for programming, graphing, and other predictive modeling. There are no code solutions out there for stringing together no code or low code AI and machine learning. There are solutions out there called things like Lang Flow and N8N. Those are solutions for stringing together agents. They're orchestration solutions. But I can tell you that Perplexity Computer is solving for those things right now on its own. And
Mhm.
so in a way, it's becoming more of a black box. That also comes with its own challenges. But if you're going to get started with it, you mentioned skills. Skills come in the form of another language called Markdown, which is a very natural language in a lot of ways, but it just starts with an easy prompt. It was for a long time needed to have great prompt engineering to
Mhm.
get these models to deliver what you wanted. But I would say today you could just initiate a conversation, ask it to help you to create the right prompt if you need it, and then move from there. Just today, I had it develop a few skills for me, connecting back to ISPE's GAMP guide with regards to computer systems assurance, and using some of the industry guides for that as well. I had it create the Markdown language to become an expert in that, or to help it to
Good.
become an expert in that, so that it could perform the right level of checking to see if we get to a more compliant solution.
Hmm.
So I guess the answer is you can get it to do all of those things for you. I think you do need to get a little bit of basic understanding of how they work, why skills are important, what Markdown is. Is Python the right selection for you? Do you need another like a Lang flow or another orchestration tool to help you? Those are questions that I think users would have to spend some time educating themselves on.
Where do you see this going, this sort of balance between a human and an agentic workforce? Because that's quite a cultural shift. And how would you help organizations think through that, the bits that you do and your team does, and where the agents fits in?
Let's start with number one. I think it's going to be very difficult for us to remove the human in the loop nature of how we'll be building in this space for quite some time, especially
Mm.
in any critical GXP system. There's simply no way that we can remove some of the human controls that are there today. And in order to even start to think about that, we've got to give those humans the right tools to understand what is being done. And so, for instance, a person who has been responsible for compiling data on, let's just say, for instance, let's go back to the tier board instance, right? Compiling data to understand what kind of trends are happening on the floor. If it's
Mm.
pulling that data from an MES, then it's going to need to show its work. So there will need to be not only an audit trail, but a traceback trail that are immediately available for the users to understand exactly what it has done to pull that data in, and to use that data if decisions are going to be made on that data for the floor that day or elsewhere.
Mhm.
So it's shifting the responsibility of the person to call a number of individuals to pull in data or to pull in PowerPoint presentations or whatever it might be that's required for a discussion on that particular day, to monitoring the data sources and understanding how those data sources are being used to develop that day's agenda or discussion, and really pushing towards augmenting their days work rather than replacing them as workers.
Yep. So still having someone there who is validating the output, maintaining audit trails. How would that work in this
Yeah,
context?
so it's actually just like any other audit trail for any QMS or things like that. It basically just keeps a running tab of every single action that it's taking in order to get the output that's required. So if you've got an orchestration layer that's taking 3 or 4 different agents, it will record the actions that those things are taking in order to collect data or produce a chart, whatever it might be, right? Or to
Hmm.
produce a scenario. So if it's collecting the data, putting the data through a model, whether it be Monte Carlo or I don't know, it could be any type of model, predictive model, and then what the output is for each of those models as it tries to select the scenario recommendation that it wants to give, then you'll see the audit trail list all of those things out alongside of or in a separate tab from its recommendation. And then the
Hmm.
trace back would be right alongside that as well, perhaps in a separate tab. Okay, great. You made that decision or you took that action. Where did that data come from exactly? Like what table
Okay.
or what source? So that information can be made available to the individual who's performing that work that day.
Are there ways to prevent hallucinations in that context? Because that's certainly in the early days of LLMs, that was always one of the main concerns.
Yeah, hallucinations for sure still happen, especially in the absence of data. So guardrails for data that could be patched over by a particular system would have to be built in. You could build them in as skills or otherwise. But again, it goes back to human in the loop. So if there's a particular decision point, if there's a type of action that's going to be taken, then the data has to be made available or the traceback information has to be made available to that human so they can help to make the decision,
Hmm.
help it to make the right decisions.
Great, thank you. Data confidentiality is still a major concern, of course.
Mhm.
How do you advise clients on that around sending sensitive manufacturing data to AI systems?
Yeah, so it all comes down to the enterprise risk tolerance, quite frankly. And in fact, I think that based on what I understand about some companies in the industry, some of them have a higher level of risk tolerance for it. But if you look at the current offerings for enterprise instances of these models, all of them state that they will not train on the data that's being shared
Hmm.
or being used by the particular corporation. That's really just for you, not for them to use for elsewhere. And it's not even a switch that somebody has to turn off. It's something that comes immediately available. The current offering from Perplexity and I think also from Claude, they explicitly state that they are HIPAA compliant. So early on, using patient data would be something that would be completely off limits.
Hmm.
And I think even now, having a cautionary approach to that is important, or a risk-based approach to that is important. But they are evolving and they're getting much better at compartmentalizing the data usage and the sharing of data across their models. It all comes down to the individual company's preference, though. On the one
Hmm.
hand, you won't be able to advance if you don't start to adopt these models. On the other hand, it does come with some level of risk that this data is out there in some way, shape,
Yep.
or form.
Where do you think this is going, Mike? It feels like everything in this space is accelerating so quickly. Sometimes it's hard to even consider, 6 to 12 months ahead. Where do you think this is going? And maybe in terms of scenarios, I guess like, on the positive side and also on the negative side, what do you think could go wrong?
This one's hard because honestly, the word vibe coding was coined 12 months ago.
Hmm.
It's almost impossible, I think, to be able to predict at this point. However, I'm more of an optimist. I don't believe that huge workforces will be displaced. I mean, I think it's obvious. We've seen there are some layoffs or some reductions in particular workforce functions. There's no question there. But I do think that that growth is still ahead of us, and there's still
Mm.
opportunity for individuals in the workforce to be able to use these tools to augment themselves and to create something new and push growth even further. There may be macroeconomic questions about demand
Mm.
and other things like that, but it's if you look back at history at any leap like this, it's been very difficult. It's very difficult to see that we wouldn't be in a better place over the next couple of years. From a negative standpoint, there are certainly questions about security. There are CrowdStrike has been writing a lot about prompt injection security
Yes.
techniques.
Mm.
Prompt injection can for sure can make your LLM do something that you don't want it to do.
Could you maybe explain that a bit, please, Mike?
Yeah, so prompt injection is really just it's a it's a it's a malicious prompt that can be given to your LLM from even an external source. Just it could be an email or even an internal source through an email.
Mm.
That basically it's written in a way that that gets the LLM to turn itself into a loop or something like that. It could be anything, but it's a malicious way to turn the LLM against itself. Or against the users, the enterprise users of the system.
Mm.
Um, and so the writing that we see from CrowdStrike is that I think there are something like 60 different ways. They've classified 60 different ways or so. There's a map on it for how prompt injection could cause havoc in your systems, and what their recommendation is to do to prevent that. That's just one small space,
Yeah.
but there are for sure challenges like the other side of the coin on the workforce space. Yes, there is going to be a change in the skills required in the workforce. There are security concerns. There remain confidentiality concerns. There are the GXP concerns that we still,
Mm.
I think, are quite some ways away from solving, especially in this agentic and LLM and generative AI space. All of those are areas where there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, yeah. Another, I suppose, unknown is the geopolitical dimension to it. So at the time we're recording this week, Anthropic is now suing the US government for being labeled a supply chain risk. And I suppose increasingly it's big tech is becoming big politics as well. So I think
Mhm.
there's a few unknowns in there as well. Particularly as I think as we all get so reliant on using these systems, we don't really want it being turned off.
100%. The challenges are going to run deep there. I mean, we can just take the small example of ride sharing services, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, right? Where, Uber was technically breaking the law in most municipalities, right? Because you have taxis who have their medallions that they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for, and those medallions were meant to control an industry.
Mm.
And they were immediately supplanted by a technically illegal offering. And it was just impossible for people to catch up or for governments to catch up. In this space, government has to catch up, and the stakes are far, far higher, right? I mean, thinking about what you just said and the utilization of AI in warfare, those are probably some of the highest stakes. Um, and then the use of really AI everywhere, whether it be in healthcare, in this industry, or otherwise, there's no legislation to catch up to it right now. There's no standardization, or there's very little. You do see some. Um, you saw Sam Altman kind of, in a way, support Anthropic
Mhm.
after the issue with Pete Hegseth and the Department of War in the United States. The the political ramifications of that turned out to just be that Anthropic wanted the Defense Department or the War Department to agree that they would not use it for certain reasons, but that Sam Altman's team and OpenAI said that they would build those controls into their systems. So who's going to do that? What kind of standards are going to be out there for that? And then how does that translate back into the industry for us? These are all open questions that I honestly, they're beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. Yeah. Mike, thank you for this. Right now, you can go onto PharmaSource and you can see some of the case studies on the article. We're going to have a few of the examples which you've talked about.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time today, Mike. Really interesting speaking to you, and looking forward to you speaking, of course, at CDMO Live Americas in Boston this October.
Looking forward to it as well. Thanks a lot, Luke. I appreciate it.